enjoy the process because that's what it's about. I don't care if I summited that mountain. It's the least important thing now in my life. The journey was amazing, but I didn't enjoy it that much when I was there, when I was doing it.
Waldemar, I'm so excited for this because when we were connected, we share two huge patterns. One of them is trying to stay in shape, the rest of our life. And I know you're in your mid 50s, I'm in my late 40s, and we're really trying to exercise and make that a key part of our life. But the other thing is just living a life of adventure. And I always say, when all's said and done, I want to look back at my life and say, I lived an unusual life of adventure. So I think that's so cool that that's a big part of your life too.
Totally. I resonate with that. I've lived my life with that vision, and and I'm still here enjoying it. So
I love it. Well, Waldemar, can you maybe start with a little bit of background about what you do and some of the recent adventures?
yeah, well, I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico City in 1968, so I'm 56 in New Year's Eve. And I grew up in Mexico City. To my parents, my dad was an avid. I wouldn't say outdoorsman. He was really into the sea. So he liked the sea. He was a captain. I mean, it's not his main job, but he was always, he still is boating all the time. So when I was really young, he took me to the sea always. Like I remember my younger days, spearfish, learning to spearfish when I was 10 years old, and just getting my little snappers and cleaning them up and cooking them on a boat, and so that got me like really in tune with just being out there and getting your own food and kind of being in tune with yourself. Even though I was really young, I can remember learning to breathe correctly so I could free dive. And then eventually I went to college. I studied architecture. And while I was in college, I got heavily involved in mountaineering, climbing, and mostly in whitewater paddling. Actually, a professor from the university took me whitewater kayaking once on our first year, and to see some ancient ruins. And I was so amazed with the sport and the lifestyle and everything. I said, I want to pull this thread as much as I can in life. So I got really involved in that. Eventually, I met a partner, a friend of mine who became my business partner, and we set up this adventure travel company or guiding company in Mexico and started guiding whitewater paddling trips and everything that had to do with mountaineering and adventure. So I guided for a long time. Eventually, he passed away on a mountain in northern India on a big climbing expedition. But I was really involved in all things adventure and expeditions. As at the same time, I was building up the adventure company, which eventually we built a small rafting lodge, and that's where my architecture background started taking relevance, and I started designing, and eventually that became a small hotel brand, active hotel brand that's called Rolavento, which I lead. So yeah, I've had like my expedition adventure life and also my entrepreneurial life.
That's also beautiful is if you manage to get them both, in sync. Because a lot of people that maybe they love the outdoors, they'll do something completely different to make money, and then they'll take a break from that job to go do something they love. But you've managed to kind of make your entrepreneurial life into your true passion.
I have. And it's not easy because, entrepreneurial life wants to take over everything. it's like a giant trying to take over everything in your life. So I have this method that's been working for me for a long time, in which I call it the someone else's train. So what I mean is, when I feel my life is like I'm in a train that's driven by, the machine guy, and it's going somewhere that I don't control the speed or the direction or the scenery that's just passing by. I don't even know the people that are with me in that train wagon. I want to get down, and I want to get off of it, right? And what the way I get off of it, of that train, is going on a adventure trip. And that kind of grounds me again, and kind of returns to who I am and why I'm doing things, and what I like. Because if not, life just takes over, and it's hard to have a clear path of where you want to go, not where life wants to take you.
Right. Especially as I find with a lot of entrepreneurs, they might they might think in the back of their head, if I work for myself, then I can have like a flexible schedule and I can do all these great things. Yes, in theory, but in practice, I've seen time and time again where you get so consumed. People that have a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, entrepreneurs are notorious for working late, working weekends, working on vacations, and it does become very consuming. So I think that's it. You have to really prioritize, like you're doing, to have adventures. And also, something I find so impressive is you're in such great physical shape in your mid-50s. And I was a professional athlete when I was young, and I've always prioritized health and fitness. But it does get harder, in my 40s. I wake up, my energy levels aren't the same, my low back aches, I maybe haven't had a good night's sleep. And it's just one of the hardest things that I do is I always just prioritize. It doesn't matter how I feel, I've got to get a work at it because I know I feel better. So of all the goals and priorities every day, highest on the list pretty much is, apart from spending a little time with my family, is getting a good work at it. So can you talk a little bit about how you maintain that discipline? And have you always been in great shape, or is it just a bit more recent that you've really prioritized that health and fitness side of you?
That's a good question. I've always been involved in keeping in shape and keeping strong, because I was involved in guiding. And I never was a professional athlete, but I was, in another sense, I needed to be super strong and super in shape because of my guiding career, right?
Yes.
I did compete in a few important competitions, whitewater competitions. I went to the World Whitewater Challenge in Africa, in the Zambezi River, competed for Mexico. But anyway, I wouldn't consider myself a professional athlete. But so what I did when I was younger is, I had this trend in which I set a goal. Maybe it was climbing a mountain. And I said, I'm going to train super hard for this goal. So, I did everything I could. I carried a big backpack full of books and went on stairs on big buildings just to build endurance and whatever. And I trained really hard. I went to the mountain. I did my best. If I accomplished the goal, the summit, I came back home and I was so exhausted, like mentally exhausted. My muscles were exhausted. I probably had a couple of strains and I needed to rest. So I rested for a while, and then I felt guilty that I was, getting lazy. And I set myself a super strong goal again and did the cycle again. And I felt that it wasn't sustainable, It was like a cycle in which I did my best, got tired, got injured, slowed down, got, guilty mind, and then did it again. Until I kept that for many, many years. So it was very much goal driven, right? Eventually, I wasn't, I think I was always strong, but I wasn't in my best shape. I was a little, I would say a little overweight, very strong, but a little overweight. And I was always injured. So I had a knee accident. I injured my knee water skiing when I was 49. And I had two surgeries, and it was a big thing because for 2 years, I couldn't even jog.
Oh,
I was in rehab, and the muscle in my left thigh was this big, the size of my arm. So everything got unbalanced. And and then the pandemic hit. And as everybody, something happened to every one of us during the pandemic. I mean, we went inside.
mm,
And I said, this isn't working for me. I'm injured, I'm tired. And I just went, I started studying. Actually, I studied when I was younger. I used to do a little martial arts, kickboxing mostly. I went back into kickboxing. I studied a bit of jujitsu. I went to a couple of jujitsu like boot camps, and started understanding breathing again from my freediving background, and then started putting together a bunch of functional movement, and I started creating these habits which involved these different areas of being healthy,
mm.
and that became my almost, yeah, my ritual every single day. And that changed my dynamic to in which now I can move every single day. It started working. I started losing weight, getting energy, getting mobile, less injured. And yeah, and that's how it came to be.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest problems. So I'm still in the jiu-jitsu world, and I'm in my mid 40s, and a lot of my training partners are either, from maybe early 40s to mid 50s, that kind of range. And they still want to keep doing these active things. And the biggest issue they run into is injuries. And so I met one of my training partners yesterday who was in his early 40s, and he told me, I've only got 2 more weeks and then I'm going to be out for 6 months. I'm going to get knee surgery. And I've had a lot of injuries, but one thing I've never had is knee surgery. And I know how tough that is. I've had friends, multiple knee surgeries, the same person. And it's such a difficult thing to come back to. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, trying to stay injury free? And I know a big part of your regime is mobility. And that's one thing I've noticed as I get older, I'm just stiff. Like I'll bend down to pick something up and it's way harder than it should be. And I think it shouldn't be this hard in my mid 40s. This is like how I should feel in maybe my mid 70s. So just not, staying strong and healthy, but also, mobile and injury free. I think they're two things that a lot of people in my kind of age range are really struggling with.
Yeah, I put a lot of effort in mobility. Like I prefer, if I had a choice, I would train mobility more than strength.
Wow.
I think that mobility gives you the ability to be actually, this is I was mountain biking 3 weeks ago. I was in Colorado. I went on a bike park, and I'm an avid mountain biker. Like I go. I have a good group of guys. I go every week. I descend fast, enduro mostly. And I was riding with my son. He was in back of me. The front tire slid, and my left shoulder hit directly into a tree, like boom, and I just went sideways. I told my kid, I think I broke my collarbone. And then I started moving it. It really hurt, but I started moving it, and I didn't break anything. I did have a big muscle strain and my back and everything, but I am sure, positive, and certain that I didn't break my shoulder because of how much I've trained mobility. I think my shoulder went all the way back there and didn't break. And after 2 weeks and a couple of, heat therapy and whatever, it's good. I think that if you can train mobility every single day, like I do mobility movements every single day of my life, doesn't matter what happens. Even if I'm feeling a little sick or have a really early flight or whatever, I do a little bit of mobility. And I think that's such a big difference for injury wise.
That's so interesting because of all the things that I've always thought about in terms of training, it's always been, for me, there's always been three things. One is the strength training, one is the cardio training, and then one is my specific sport training. And I've never even thought about distinct mobility training until recently. So that's actually why I was so excited to talk to you. Did you learn specific movements to open up your body? Can you talk about some of the major movements that people should be doing every day to kind of open up their mobility and flexibility?
Yeah. So I learned them from different people. I learned them from a trainer who does mobility training for some MMA fighters, who taught me like the fundamentals of why and why it makes sense to move with grace. And that's how he put it. He said, I teach the toughest people on earth, the toughest guys on earth, how to move like a dancer with grace, right? And they become better fighters. So, I went on a camp with him and kind of understood the importance of it. And it's all about mobility. And then I also through life met this like therapist in Florida who does a lot of therapy for the water ski and wakeboarding pros who get injured quite a bit. And he taught me this theory about creating mobility through torsional movements in the body. So you shove your hip forward while you're twisting your upper body. And then that creates this openness in the hip and I guess lubricates the spine. And you have to engage the core muscles to create those movements. So I think that the combination of functional movement and core movement with mobility is the secret to gaining, I would say, controlled mobility. Because I think that, for example, yoga practitioners that only practice yoga have amazing mobility, but sometimes they lack strength, right? Their muscles are like elongated and kind of. And when you engage distortional movements with isometric, just staying in one place, and I think that creates a lot of stability in the body. So I do these kind of movements every single day, and it takes me like 20 minutes. I call it my morning ritual. I actually changed, and this is something that clicked for me big time. Is I always, or everybody talks about, my daily routine, right? My daily exercise routine. And for me, a routine started having like a negative connotation in the sense that it's always the same, it's repetitive. I have to do it no matter what, no matter how, doesn't matter how I feel, right? And then as you get older, as you know, energy starts lacking and you don't always feel like doing your 50 burpees, right? So what I started to change is I changed the vocabulary, and instead of saying my daily routine, I say my daily ritual, movement ritual, which means something that is nourishing, right? It's something that I crave and does me good, makes me happy. And when I change that, it's easier to keep at it, because I think the biggest objection once you get older is you cannot rely on willpower. I think willpower, eventually, if you're sick or if you had a discussion or if you're down or if you're whatever, you lack willpower. But if you rely on a ritual that makes you happy, then it's so much easier to do it every single day, right?
That's so interesting. Yeah, just changing the word from it's my routine to it's my ritual. That goes from routine is going to be many days. Oh, I don't want to do this. Going to force myself through it and use discipline. Or this is my beautiful ritual, be my best self. Now, I really believe in the power of just reframing things with words like that, to make all the difference. And you're so right. If you try and rely on motivation, our motivation comes and goes. That's when we need rituals, we need routines, we need things that we don't even think about. So we take it's not like we have to, there's that famous thing in psychology where we only have a certain amount of decisions we can make in every day until we get decision fatigue. So all the things that are important to me, I don't even question, do I do this today or not? I know I'm going to do them, and then I don't have to have this decision fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a habit, right? When you, I think there's a process in which you start by, don't doing something new. And it's at first it's an effort, right? Then it becomes a practice. Then it becomes second nature. And then it becomes who you are, right? When your movement or your practice during the morning becomes who you are, it's not an effort anymore. It's your nature, right?
Yeah,
And
and once it's internalized like that, if you don't do it, you don't feel like yourself. So there's so much intrinsic motivation to feel good. Therefore, I've got to do my rituals so I can feel good.
Yeah, and then there's no effort in it. But there's always an effort, of course. You have to have the discipline, but I think there's such a big mind game in keeping active after 50, and it's more about creating this process in your mind that what you're doing makes you happy, and you can sustain that for 30 years every day, or it becomes a huge effort that you start questioning more and more because you're getting older, and you say, well, maybe I'm just trying to stay ridiculously young, and I'm not embracing my age, right? And I should chill, and I should, it doesn't matter if I get a little overweight as long as I'm enjoying life. And I think that starts messing in your head every single day. So that's my process, and it's worked for me really well.
That's so true. I remember I think it was when Lance Armstrong came back after he won 7 Tour de France's, he retired. Then he came back and he was talking about how it's not that the body can't do it anymore. It's that as we become older, and especially if you become more successful, you just can't push yourself in your mind the same places. So then, of course, you're not going to have the same fitness. And I think you said something really interesting about how, you get to a certain age and you think, well, I shouldn't, I'm in my 50s now. It's time to enjoy life. I shouldn't still prioritize, working out hard and health and fitness. But I'm so lucky. My dad is 76, and every summer, my mom's from the south of France. They have a little condo down there. Every summer they go from England to the south of France, and my dad will do a 10-week hike across the Alps mountains or the Pyrenees mountains. And it's like, so I've seen him doing things like that my whole life. So for me, I've never associated aging and getting older with being sedentary and out of shape. But I'm so lucky that I have that role model because that's so rare. You mentioned your dad was, you were doing water sports and things when you were younger. Is he in pretty good shape? Is he doing okay? Because I know it gets so much harder as we get older for our parents.
Yeah, he's 84. He is in really good shape. Never gets sick.
Wow.
And he gets up every single day at 6, goes to the pool, swims, then he does some breath hold swims, and then he does little weights and tiny ones now. But he has the same motivation as when he was younger. It's like you say, I think it's a big example of not giving up, of not saying, I'm gonna stay in the couch and just, this is an extreme, but people make these little decisions every time, and it just creeps in without you noticing.
Mm.
You get less active. And I think that, I don't know, there's so many thousands of ways to exercise, right?
Yeah.
The important thing is to do them, to get up and do them, right? And I think that's the biggest the biggest objection everybody has in keeping it sustainable for the long run. And I think that even if you do a little bit, but you do it every single day and you enjoy it, you end up being in shape.
Mhm.
It's a
And
process.
And I'll admit, there's something about, I know from talking to a lot of people that get into jiu-jitsu, they love it so much because it's different and it's not just physical exercise, but it's also mental exercise. On top of that, you have the level of camaraderie and you see people, so you get the social benefit. And a lot of them say, I've been working out for so long, whether it's lifting weights or doing cardio or something, and they just say, I get bored. So if you can do things where you can kind of stack different things. So I always say, if I meet a buddy in summer and we go for a run together, I take my shirt off, I get some vitamin D, I'm getting my exercise, I'm chatting to my buddy about life. And so we have a social component. So you're kind of stacking these positive things on each other and you're making working out much more fun. Because, people like you and I, in the short term, we can do workouts that are miserable just for fitness, but it's probably unsustainable if you hate it every time. So like you said, there's so many different ways to work out. We have to find what works for us, and then it's going to be much easier to have the consistency and longevity.
Yeah, I think that community component is so important. You know, like you say, it's hard to do everything by yourself. You get bored after a while, and that camaraderie is very. I think it's very important to keep, to keep moving and to enjoy. I think it's all about eventually. I think you have to enjoy what you're doing, and that's why I emphasize that word. I think it's so important for you to enjoy your process. If you're if it's big if it becomes an uphill battle, I think you eventually drop it. And if it so choose things that you enjoy. I do feel that, all these components of mobility, strength, functional strength, endurance, breath work, I think it, when you put everything together, then the package is really strong.
Yeah,
And
like
friends.
right, yeah, that the sum of the individual parts, when you put them all together, it's even more beneficial.
Yeah.
What was it like for you as a father? Did your kids see you just making exercise part of your life, and they wanted to do the same thing? Or because I always want to have a 4-year-old, and he's just kind of starting sports, but I want it to come from him. I don't want to be. I really don't like the parents that try to push things on their kids. I want it to be intrinsic for them. And that's actually how I found martial arts as a teenager. Was I used to watch the 80s movies and I'd see these larger than life characters and I said, I want to do that. So because it came from me, I'm still doing it 30 plus years later. So can you talk a little bit about, raising healthy kids? Because I think that's that's another struggle today. I don't know what it's like for you in Mexico, but in the US, every parent is struggling with the allure of the screens and kids. It's easy just to give your kid a screen and you get 2 hours a piece, but that's probably not doing your children much good. Back when I grew up, my parents were like, you've got to stop playing outside and you've got to come in, and now it's the other way around. Now parents are trying to get the screen and kick their kids outside to play outside.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been through that path. My oldest daughter is 23.
23, okay.
And then my boy is 20 and my youngest boy is 18. So they're teenagers, adults, young adults. And they've always been involved in sports somehow. My daughter is, I would say, an amateur slash professional equestrian rider. So she's been riding all her life and competing so it's been part of her life. She knows that there's times to enjoy and there's times to train and keep wanting your goal, right? And my two younger boys started wakeboarding when they were really young, and they got into competitive wakeboarding when they were really young, trained very hard. They went to Pan American games, and then eventually made it to the World Cup of wakeboarding. And I do feel, and I'm going to be honest, I do feel that they trained a little too much, too seriously when they were younger. And my older boy, when he was 16, had a meniscus injury. So that's really young to have a meniscus injury. Mm-hmm. And he had surgery. And then, I think he said, Dad, I'm not going to injure myself forever because of training. And my younger boy said the same. And he said, I saw what my older brother went through, knee surgery, and I don't want to go through that. And they dropped it. They're totally active kids, play a lot of sports, but not competitive anymore. So that's a lesson, I thought me and my wife would never push our kids. We never said you have to do this, but maybe in some way we did, right? We did push, and they felt that they had to, they had to be the best. So yeah, that's a lesson.
That is such a great lesson. So I just got back last weekend. I was doing some hiking with a friend of mine in Vail in Colorado. And he works in Denver, and then he has a place in Vail. So he goes up and he loves doing all the same things as you do, mountain biking, skiing in the winter. And he's got a 2-year-old, and I've got my 4-year-old, and we were both boys. And we were kind of talking about that, he's a real type A personality. And he really, he loves he loves the idea of his son being this championship skier. And he's starting skiing already at 2 years old. But we were talking about that. If you look at all the Olympic hopefuls, you're going to have thousands and thousands of kids that are going to try so hard and sacrifice so much, and they're never going to get to the actual, winning at the Olympics. And then you look at the best case scenario, the medal winners, even the best case scenario, the gold medal winners, they have a lot of issues after they retire from competing. And so as a parent, you're trying to balance the fact that, yes, of course, if your child has this incredible aptitude for a sport, you want to give them every opportunity, you want to encourage them, you hope they're going to achieve this great success. But all the studies show that for your happiness levels afterwards, it's really tough. Like Michael Phelps, one of the greatest Olympic athletes of all time, he had so many struggles when he retired. So I just think it's such a tough thing to navigate as a parent. So I'm so glad you shared that story about your boys. And like you said, it is a bit young to be having a serious knee injury. And it's a good lesson that I always say that I didn't want to peak physically at 19 or 25. I had my last professional fight at 35. And I felt like at least that's a bit older to be peaking, as opposed to these people where they go so hard, they get injuries, and maybe they peak in their early 20s, and then they're just, their body's broken, and the rest of their life is going to be, it's kind of tough.
Yeah. You were a fighter?
Yes. But not, by the way, I had a career, and I was an amateur. I did it as an amateur level. And then I made some money, and I took a sabbatical, and I fought professionally. But it wasn't like I didn't need to live off that money. It was more like a personal challenge to see how far I could go before I was too old. So I focused on that for about 5 years. So I was 35, and I was happy with what I accomplished, but it wasn't, I wasn't the best in the world or anything. But it was about the personal journey. So that's kind of back to the same conversation. I know what I got out of that, just doing something very difficult and sacrificing and trying to be your best self in athletics. I think you can take a lot of those lessons over to business and life, in general. So I think it's really useful as long as you don't do irreparable damage, like with fighting, head trauma can be really bad, or really bad injuries. So it's that kind of balance that I've just been thinking a lot about, because my son is now just at that age where now he's asking me, I want to start playing soccer, I want to do jiu-jitsu. He's asking me to start doing these things.
I read an article about the philosophy in the Scandinavian countries regarding competition, and it made a lot of sense. It said that they don't encourage younger kids to compete. They encourage them to do sports without competition, like just have fun. go on a bike ride, but there's no winner. It's just a big bike ride, right? And eventually, when they get a little older, I can't remember the age, but it was older, like 14 or something, is when they start introducing the competitiveness chip. And it makes sense. It makes sense because then when you're young, it's about having fun,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the sport where I was more proficient was whitewater paddling, and I peaked at 30,
30, okay.
30, 32, because it's pretty mental. I guess it's similar to fighting. It's a lot of mental and control and just breathing and knowing that you're getting into serious circumstances where you can get hurt. And it's about breathing and staying calm and navigating the whole deal. So,
But Ferdinand, that's pretty good. Like peaking in your 30s, I think that's pretty good. I like the idea of stretching it out. And I love what you said as well about not pushing your kids to compete too young, because as you get older, you realize I always used to laugh when in fighting, because fighting is one-on-one and it's very personal, like you can hurt your opponent or your opponent can hurt you. People would get really personal sometimes. And for me, there's a beautiful, the Latin of competition, it comes from two words, com and patir, and it means to come together. So I always saw competition as I'm coming together with somebody else to push myself to a limit that I couldn't do by myself and be my best self. So I always saw it as a slightly different thing. But I think with kids, with my son, I mean, he's still very young, but I want his whole life just to be a big game and to have fun, because I know that society naturally will structure it and make it less fun, as he gets older. So the longer I can stretch that out, the better. And I just love that idea of keeping sports fun, like it's not, he doesn't have to use sports to pay the bills right now. He's a kid, stretch that out as long as you can. So I think that's really, really good advice about just taking the pressure off young kids.
Yeah. Because, and like I said, with my own example, I was very conscious with my wife in not pressuring them. Like
Yes.
we talked about it. Never pressure them. In the age, we might have other ways, not verbally saying, "Hey, you have to do this, right? You have to place first or whatever." We never said that, but we did something.
Right. That's so true.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? So now you have a bit more wisdom. If you could talk to your younger self, maybe when you were in your mid-20s or something, and give yourself some wisdom on longevity, because now you're older, like you and I, we both have a different philosophy. When I was young, I didn't even think about the damage I was doing to my body that I would have to deal with when I get older. You don't even think like that when you're young, right? You're so obsessed with whatever you're trying to do in sports. But is there some wisdom that you wish you could tell your younger self?
I think I wish somebody told me it's not about the goal. It's about the process. And it's something that, I mean, that's probably the most ancient wisdom there is, right? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey or whatever, however you want to say it. I was always very goal driven, and I think that got me hurt or injured or not enjoy the process. I remember I climbed a pretty hard mountain in the Peruvian Andes, a technical mountain. It was three climbers, three of us. We climbed a hard route. It's called the Arteson Raju. Really difficult to say, but I remember it was so much about getting to the summit that we had a super hard climb. We got to the summit, and just about when we were at the summit, I had this urge of saying, "Okay, let's get down now. It's over. We need to get down." And then when I think about it now, is that why didn't I just stay there, enjoy the view for 10 minutes? It was always about, the next thing and the next thing. And I think that's very, very strong wisdom is that enjoy the process, because that's what it's about. I don't care if I summited that mountain. It's the least important thing now in my life. The journey was amazing, but I didn't enjoy it that much when I was there, when I was doing it.
We are such kindred spirits. That is so true, and that's exactly what I would tell myself too. I remember when I knew that it was going to be my last fight, and I knew afterwards I was going to tell my coaches I was retiring. I said to myself, I'm going to actually enjoy this, like the actual process, because up until then, every single, whether it was amateur or professional, every single every single fight, I used to have this thought a few weeks before, where the last few weeks you're so miserable because your body's been beat up in training, you're cutting weight, so you're on a restricted diet, you've been very disciplined with your diet, and you're so worried about getting a last minute injury or getting a cold or a flu or something. Before you have so much stress. I'd always just think, oh, if I could just click my fingers and fast forward the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I would. And then the last fight, I said, this is the last time I'm ever going to do it. And thankfully it went well and I won, but I enjoyed the process, from the days before to the day of, to wrapping my hands, to all kinds of things that used to just give me anxiety. And all the other fights they all kind of blend into each other. I have fragmented memories, but the last one, I have such clear memories, such positive memories, and it made the whole experience so much better. And I thought, my God, if I could only have had that attitude 10 years before, when I was, doing amateur boxing and all these other things I was doing, where I never enjoyed it unless it was over. And hopefully, like you said, you've ticked the box for the goal. And now I know it's cheesy to say, but the wisdom is in what you said about the destination is the key. So with jiu-jitsu, you have belts. And I remember when I was going to get my black belts, I was like, it's nice to have the goal accomplished. But I realized after, I was like, man, this doesn't mean anything. This day doesn't really mean too much. It's about all the people I've met for the journey of the last 20 years. And so I think that's such good wisdom. I wish I could tell myself, listen, we're humans and we seek, to accomplish goals. And we do, especially when you're young, you care about what what people around you think and your peer group. But really what's important is just enjoying the journey. So there's so much wisdom there. And I wish that I could tell myself, my younger self, that exact same thing.
And what I'm thinking right now is that I should tell my sons and daughter this more often. It's not about the goal, it's about the journey, because you take it for granted. And so I actually wrote it down as you were talking, because it's important to emphasize it. And I think that when you come from a family in which your parents are type A, and they're doers and they're high achievers or whatever you want, the kids have pressure. They're always like, I can't be the failure in the family, right? In their minds. And I think it's important to emphasize it's about the process. It's not about achieving the goal. It's about the process. Because when you're younger, sometimes that knowledge comes in one year and goes out the other, the exact same moment. But something stays, I think.
That's so true. I remember listening, I forget his name, but he was a very successful entrepreneur in Brazil. And he won all these different awards and he was very well known in his industry. And he said he had all these, plaques, these awards that he got and photos with these famous Brazilian celebrities. And he said that when his kids, he had young kids, and then as they started to get a bit older, he started taking things down. He didn't want them to be in a house where he's got all these great things about himself. And then even if it's subconscious, putting that, like you said, putting that pressure on the kids where they feel like they're in this huge shadow that they have to live up to because they're his kids. And I never even thought about that before, but that's so true. And you mentioned the thing about the type A parents. Even if it's subconscious, they're still putting that pressure on the kids. And it's like, especially, I just look at my son and he's just in this, for him, the world revolves around, everything it revolves around him. He's in this little bubble of happiness. And I just want to keep him in that bubble as long as possible. And I think it's beautiful to see, like, kids they're so in a moment and, they're not worried about the future or past. They're just enjoying, life in the moment. And that's, as an adult, what I'm trying to do more of. I'm trying to care less about what society expects of me, how my parents think I should live my life. Even some of my friends, what we really have to figure out how to live an authentic life and not care about others around me. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited for this, because you've crafted your whole life like that, where you're living a life that's so authentic to you and what you care about. And it's just really rare.
Yeah, I don't know how I had the vision to create that, but I do remember when I was really young. I don't know if you remember way back then when cigarettes could be sponsored on TV. There were
Yes,
a
I remember.
commercial for cigarettes, and there was this brand that was called Camel cigarettes, and the whole campaign was based upon this really good looking adventure dude that was dressed in this safari clothing, and he was in this log raft in the Amazon. And I remember that vision since I was really young. And I said, I want to be that guy. I want to experience that. And somehow, I made it happen through my journey in life. I never let go of that vision, although I had, I went to college, I did architecture, which doesn't have anything to do with that. And I had kids, and I come from a family that is like an industrial background. But eventually I made the paths come together through keeping my vision alive, I guess.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, just because the idea of money, everyone has a different approach and philosophy and thoughts about money. But I'd love to know how do you see money?
True, that's a good question. I think money I think money is definitely a tool to do things, and it's really hard when you don't have economic stability, you know, because then the stress that creates is difficult to overcome with whatever method you use. I think. I guess you have to make peace with money, and there's always somebody who makes more money, right? And if you always compare yourself to somebody who makes more money, then you become unhappy or unfulfilled. So I think you have to have like a vision of what you want to do in life that makes you happy, and what resources you need to make that happen. And then work for that, if your vision of happiness is, I don't know, having a yacht to do a tour around the world, then that'll cost some money, and you have to make it happen, right? Because then it won't, and you probably won't be fulfilled. But I do think that if your drive is money, you will never be satisfied. There's always something bigger, more expensive, more lavish, more luxurious that somebody else has that you don't. And then it never ends, that race.
That's so true. Yeah. If that's your driving factor, then you can always put another zero after whatever you have. You're just never going to be happy. And I feel like I think one of the saddest things is when you have somebody who works hard and they're very focused by money, and they think, if I can just get to this much, then all my problems will be over and I'll be happy. And they only realize maybe it's, they become partner in their law firm after they've been working 2 decades, and they've sacrificed their health, and they've sacrificed, they don't have the best relationship with their family maybe because they work so much. And then once they get it, they realize that, well, yeah, now I don't have any money problems, but there's other things more important than that, but I've kind of let go by the wayside. And so I'm fascinated by reading. There's a few great books where they talk about, it's these hospice nurses where they deal with hundreds and hundreds of people at the end of their lives, and they talk to them about, what you think at the end of your life. If you're dying and you have a couple of weeks to live, or even sometimes a couple of days, what are your final thoughts? And it tends to be the same themes, and not one of them says, I wish I had more zeros in my bank account. But at the same time, I'm sure maybe it's not stated, but you have to have, like you said, you have to have enough to take out the monetary stress of life and make sure you can have a roof over your head and your family is going to be okay. But it's always the same things that they talk about. They talk about they wish they had spent more time with people they loved. They wish they had been more authentic to themselves and not care about what other people thought about them. A lot of them wish they'd worked less and they'd done things, they followed their passions and things that really fired them up. So I just think that's such a great thing to think about now. I still have the time to make changes in my life and structure my life so that I just don't want to be that person at the end of it all with regrets when I don't have any time to make any changes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do think, though, that it's not black or white, It's always this learning process in which you test going one way, and then does it make you happy, or nah, not so much, and then you test the other way, and I think it's always this balance game in life in which you're testing, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The way you describe that, it's kind of like surfing a wave. And if you're happy and you're not always balancing and recalibrating as you're surfing, then you're going to wipe out. But in order to be successful in life, you have to just keep recalibrating as you're surfing, just like surfing a big wave. I think that's so true. It's like we need that constant recalibration. It's not like we can just say, yeah, I got life's philosophy figured out and I'm all good. It's probably not going to work like that.
It doesn't happen. Yeah, it doesn't happen. And I guess sometimes what happens is if you're not totally there, totally, absolutely satisfied, which is hard to achieve, honestly, then you feel unhappy, and then you're like, I'm not achieving, right? I think you have to kind of let go a little bit and know that it's this exploration of what makes sense. And again, it's not getting there. It's what you discover in the process, right?
So true. There's one last thing I wanted to ask you. So you were talking about that accident you just had a few weeks ago. And one of the things, so it's funny because I was a fighter and I was getting all this head trauma. So people think that I have an incredible high tolerance for risk. But actually, it's the opposite. I think a lot about that. So when I was a kid, I used to be a really good skier and then snowboarder. And I remember the last time I went snowboarding, I was in my early 20s and I was 24 and I just got into boxing and I wanted to win the Chicago Golden Gloves. And I remember it wasn't crazy, but I had an accident on a snowboard and I kind of got a little banged up. And I thought, if I had hurt myself more and I would have missed out on this, it's only once a year, the Golden Gloves, this competition I was training for, it wouldn't be worth it to me. So for me, the risk and reward of snowboarding wasn't worth it. And the same thing with mountain biking. I have a good friend, he's actually a jiu-jitsu instructor, who broke his collarbone when he was mountain biking. And I think, so for me, it's hard to, you live your life, you're so physically healthy, you look so good. It's hard for me to get the idea around, but you have a very high tolerance for risk if you're tearing down the mountain on a mountain bike, right? So how do you resolve those two, conflicts of you're still doing risky things where your body's at kind of high risk, but also, if you, like you said, when you went through that knee surgery, that must have been really dark and difficult to come out of when you were stuck and you couldn't exercise. So I just find that's so interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, I think that the perception of risk for everyone is totally different, and it's related to how confident you are doing something, right? So I think that it's kind of stupid to if you're having a fight and you're not a mountain biker, it's kind of dumb to go mountain biking really hard 1 week before, right? I think the risk is huge. Even if you're not like jumping huge things, it's just the risk is huge. But if it's your sport and you're really in tune with it and you've done it and you've progressed, I think the risk is way smaller for someone who knows what he's doing than for someone who doesn't know what he's doing. So I think that I used to play with risk a lot when I was whitewater paddling. So whitewater paddling is a risky sport. And if you're gonna run a hard rapid, you know that you're getting into willingly into this difficult, maybe life-threatening situation, right? And your option is, should I do this willingly, or should I just, carry my kayak, walk around the rapid, and keep paddling? It's a big decision, right? And I think that when you see people from the outside looking at a whitewater paddler who's making a decision to paddle a class 5 rapid, it's like the risk is ridiculous, Why should anybody do that? But when you're there and you've gone through the process and you're in tune and you're in the flow and everything, I think the risk is way smaller. So I think there's always perceived risk and real risk. And it's about how confident and how much in the flow you are and honest with yourself, right? Because I remember, again, paddling, it's super easy to get peer pressure. You're in this rapid, you're with really good paddlers, everybody's making the decision, should I paddle or should I not run this rapid? It's like big waves with wave surfing, I guess. Should I run or shouldn't I? And if you have this peer pressure in which somebody's, oh, come on, you can, and you push yourself and make a decision that you don't feel comfortable with, there's big consequences. So I think you really have to be honest and true to yourself, saying, do I feel in control doing this or not? And if the answer is not, then the risk is high.
Yes.
If the answer is I do, I think the risk is smaller. Of course, if you're, I don't know, jumping off cliffs with this suit about and going through under a bridge, the risk is high any way you look at it, right? But within normal parameters, I think it's a perceived thing.
I love that idea of
I think
risk.
People that are driven by, courage or just being super brave and doing crazy stuff are taking a huge risk. It's about working towards the place where you feel comfortable doing a difficult thing. It's not about having big balls. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you said something interesting about if for someone like you, the risk of mountain biking is so much less than for my jiu-jitsu friend. Because for my jiu-jitsu friend, he's a jiu-jitsu guy. He just does a bit, he dabbles here and there. So of course the risk is much higher because it's not his thing. But I'm just curious because I think it's I think everyone figuring out their risk tolerance and what they're willing to risk on things is something that's very personal. I love what you said about, if you're doing something that's maybe a bit out of your comfort zone because you have peer pressure, then the risk is going to be much higher than if you're doing something that you feel 100% you can cope with. But since that accident you just had, because it was so recent, do you feel a bit more cautious now? Are you going to be a bit more careful, or for you it was just a one-off thing? You're okay and back to normal?
No, I do think I it was the first run. It was in Vail.
Oh, no way. Okay.
Yeah, and it was my first day, my first run. My kid was in the back, pushed, breathing in my neck. And the mountain bike, hadn't used that mountain bike for a while. So there were things that added up that led to me sliding my front tire and crashing. It wasn't freak, right?
Yes.
I should have read the signals and said, take it easier the first run, and then kind of progress to your normal level. But looking back at it, I crashed on the first run on a mountain bike that I hadn't ridden much with my kid. I had some pressure put on myself.
Yes.
So, yeah.
But
I don't. of course, it hurt, and I said, "Wow, maybe, this thought came in my head. Maybe I should, you know, chill a little bit." But now I don't. I feel that I want to keep my level, and I want to keep doing it correctly.
Mm. No, that's awesome. Well, I mean, I really enjoyed this. I find it so inspiring when I get to talk to people like you who, you're much further along the path of the things that I'm doing. You're a little bit older and you're still in great shape. You have three pretty much grown up kids now. I'm just starting a family a little bit late. So I think it's really inspiring. I'll put a link to your book. I think it's called Find Your Wild Flow, talking about how to balance strength, health, mobility. I know you're so passionate about it, but I'll give you the last word. I really appreciate the time.
And Lawrence, it was great. I really appreciated the conversation. It was personal. I felt like I was talking to a friend, and that's great. I'd be happy to keep on talking. Yeah.
And yeah, we just missed each other. I think we were 2 weeks apart in Vale. So
Oh,
there a few weeks ago, and I was just there. I was probably hiking. We did a few warm up hikes on the. We saw some mountain bikers go through. So that's super cool. But really appreciate your time and keep being so inspiring, because sometimes when you're doing awesome things, you don't realize the influence you have. But I have no doubt you're inspiring so many people who look up to you. You're in such good shape, and you seem like you really enjoy life. And ultimately, what greater thing can you say to someone is healthy and they're enjoying every day?
thanks very much, Lawrence. Same to you. Thank you for the openness and sharing all this through your podcast.